COVID is the reason we are doing this session, and probably another session as well after this. In March, the Commission on the Status of Women was scheduled to meet in New York City. And for the first time, our organization, International Women's Convocation, had a parallel event on the calendar. We were set to do a presentation, a panel presentation about the women's empowerment through grassroots organization, something that we have been doing for a number of years. But then CSW was canceled due to the beginnings of the idea that travel and staying in place was going to be necessary for this virus, and so our workshop was canceled, along with all of the hundreds of workshops that happened during Commission on the Status of Women each year. And so here we are. Carmen Capriles was one of the people that was due to speak on the panel. Dr. Rika Lamar was also going to speak on the panel, and we hope to have her presentation at some point in the future. But Carmen is with us today to present. Also, because this is via Zoom rather than in person, we have another person from Bolivia who will be presenting as well. And this series is intended to keep the conversation going, to remind us about issues of women's empowerment that are important no matter what the health situation of the world may be at any given time. So I hope you will have questions as this presentation goes forward, and there will be plenty of time for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation. So we have two people presenting today. Carmen Capriles is, wait a minute, I need to put my glasses on. Carmen Capriles is educated as an architectural engineer, and she is an activist for climate change issues and for women's empowerment. And she lives in Bolivia, is the founder of Reacción Climático, Reaction to the Planet, a volunteer organization which brings forward climate change issues in the Andean region. She's also very active around United Nations organizations, NGOs, and organizations within the UN. She's working on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. She was at the Paris meeting that put together the climate change, the most recent climate change agreement. And she's very active in all kinds of areas around the United Nations, a wealth of connection and information for me as I go forward. She also spoke at our 2015 gathering in Bolivia on women's empowerment and climate change in particular. Our other speaker, who will be with us, I think, by phone to Carmen, and Carmen will be translating for her, is Calixta Xocua. And Calixta is in Bolivia. She was at our gathering in 2015 as well. That gathering, as some of you may remember who were there, was a time that we put together some action plans, both around climate change and women's empowerment, women's leadership in particular. And Calixta is involved as a facilitator and planner in that women's leadership project, which is going forward in District 7 Viacata, which is outside of La Paz. Carmen Calixta, wonderful to have you with us. Carmen, please take it over and talk with us for I think 15 minutes. We've talked about on projects and plans and what you are doing in Bolivia.
Thank you, Carol. I hope everybody can hear me. Clear
Yes.
enough? Okay. Well, I'm going to be speaking about the challenges that we have here in Bolivia to empower marginalized women and girls. A little bit about Bolivia. We are in the middle of South America. We are we are not on the list of the poorest countries. We are a second great income country, and nevertheless, we have lots of challenges due to still be a country, a developing country, far behind many others in the region. So my presentation it's usually more focused on climate change, which is one of the main issue that I work, especially with the grassroots organization that I belong, which is Reacción Climática. But now I'm going to try to also speak a little bit about what the pandemic means for all of us. Oh no, it's not, oh, there it is. Well, I want to start with the Millennium Development Goals, which started in 2000. Most of my work is focused on policy advocacy, because we do believe that it is necessary that women, that there is a global policy toward the empowerment of women. And this began with the Millennium Development Goals, which had the aim, one of the results that the Millennium Development Goals was that international cooperation was able to fix money on issues that were really crucial for development, especially for developing countries. The Millennium Development Agenda was begun in 2000 and it ended in 2015. And yet most of the goals were achieved, not the same in all the countries, but it did trace a route map for the countries to where they should go in order to have better policies towards certain issues like basically poverty. So in 2015, the new Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development was adopted in UN. That has 17 goals. The goals I work with, the SDGs that I work with, are number 5, 13, and 16. And basically because these are the three main goals that are mainstream along the whole agenda. Gender equity, because we still need to empower women. We have seen that globally, we still have a big gap that we have to reduce. Climate change, because climate change is still one of the greatest challenges that we have. And promoting peace and inclusive societies, which is also key in order to reduce violence, in order not to generate wars, in order to start facing peacefully the challenges that we have. So besides the Agenda 2030, we also have CEDAW, which is the Convention of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And basically the Article 14 of CEDAW starts speaking about rural women. And we speak about rural women because rural women are one of the most vulnerable populations that we have. Although we have seen that it's necessary to reduce the global gap between men and women all around the world, and of course considering LGBTs and other genders along the scope. It is also necessary to understand that there is a feminization of the rural areas, and that women have to face these challenges harder in rural areas. In urban centers, we have seen that in some sort of way the gap it can shrink, but in rural areas it grows bigger because of the activities that they carry on, because the insecurity they live on, because they are the precarious ways that they have. Also, it's important that women are also included in the rights of Indigenous people. Not if we go to the rural areas, we have to take into account that Indigenous women are most vulnerable, even because in many cases they only speak local languages. Most of them do not come out of the communities. Many of them have the challenge to pass on the traditions, the language, their ways of life, and in many cases, there are a lot of challenges that they have, especially with some uses and customs. And we're living in a very globalized world that it's getting to Indigenous communities, and not always in a good way. Well, in the case of climate change, the convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change also has a gender constituency, which is in charge of promoting policies toward women and climate change, because in the last decades, it's been obvious that the impacts of climate change uh, have a gender scope. Since women, well, climate change magnifies inequalities. And if we're talking about these gaps around women and men, climate change is maximizing them. So women that do not have access to education, that don't have access to income, that don't have access to possibilities to migrate are going to be hit harder than men that have more education, more access to income, more access to migration. And those are only some examples. And the gender constituency has the role to speak about these challenges that we have. And one of the things that I want to speak on this is that, for example, probably most of you have seen the global map of the COVID-19. Unfortunately, that map does not have disaggregated data by sex. I think it's important that we have that kind of data that we can analyze and that we can see it, because those are the challenges that we face when we speak about the empowerment of women. How are women being affected by this virus, for example? And although we know that more than 2 million people have already gotten the virus, we don't know how many are women and how many are men, how many are children, how many are old people, and how the recovery is going. And I think that's important in order to draft solutions toward this. And then we have the environmental justice and climate justice movement that we're promoting, which is like in the civil society side, that we have to be aware of what are the challenges that we're facing environmentally around climate change, and right now with the pandemic. So although probably most of you have heard in the networks, in social media, that the COVID is doing a great job on environmental issues, but that's not yet reflected on the data. For example, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere for February 2020 was 416, and for March was 417, which means that the emissions are still on the atmosphere. It's not that easy to cut down the emissions. Probably there is a cut down on the emissions, but we still don't know how we're going to see that reflected, because it's not going to be shown at a short time, but in a long time. Although there are some impacts that you can see right now, many cases of rivers, for example, or creeks that are less polluted, the air that's less polluted, and you can see that in specific places, like for example, China, the emissions are not as big as they were, but still in a global level, because we have to take into account that the emissions don't only come from sectors like transportation. The impacts that the fires last year had, the fires in the Amazon, the fires in Africa, the fires in Australia had on the atmosphere have been really big. And those fires we didn't saw other decades, the magnitude and how they spread and so on. And it is related to climate change. I'm not going to enter into the technical details around that, but we really need to start seeing that it's not only about one thing or the other. Everything is connected. And so that's why working and pushing environmental justice is so hard and so important, because we need to find the people accountable for their actions and for what's happening, what's going on, who is behind those fires, for example, or who has the right to contaminate, to pollute water, to pollute the air, and how do we deal with this? And it's not only a question about just putting money from one place to another, because I think one of the great lessons that COVID may teach our generation is that money cannot solve all the problems. We need science, and we need to start listening to the science, to scientists, to find the solutions, to see where where the problems are, where the roots of the problems are, and not to have just solutions that are that may not be real, what we call false solutions. And under the COVID scenario, one of those false solutions had been, for example, hydrochloroquine, which has thought to be a good medicine for the COVID, and now we have proved that it's not that good and may not be the cure that we're looking for. So that's important to start seeing things and attacking things from the root of the problem, and not just to find solutions that in most cases they sound too good to be true, and we like to believe that they are good, and it does have an impact on us to create hope and so on. But sometimes it's more important to step on ground and to see what the real problems are and what the real solutions are. In the case of climate change, is obviously getting the levels of greenhouse gases lowering, especially CO2, and it has to be a global effort, and we have to find governments accountable for that. Well, I'm going to be a little bit more specific to talk about the challenges that Bolivian women have. And although women, especially in rural areas, are the ones that contribute less, with the CO2 emissions, they are the ones that are suffering already the impacts of climate change. And the impacts of climate change may be really subtle and not be so big that it needs to be covered by mainstream media, for example. So that's why it's not in the agenda, still overseen and so on. But some of the impacts that we can speak on is that they are facing droughts in many places, or floods in other places. And in the rural areas, they depend a lot on their agriculture. Therefore, it is necessary to take that into account and to have the means to solve these problems. And it's not fair for them to have this impact while they are the ones that are feeding us in many cases, because most of the men, they go to the city, they leave the women behind, and they have to take care of the land, of the animals, of the crops, and of the agricultural activities that in most cases are really, really hard work. And they are subsidizing this work. But right now, I think in the COVID scenario, where frontiers have been lost, have been closed, I think it's very necessary to start focusing on local production. And because we're not going to be able to have our food brought from everywhere in the country as it has been until now, I think we have to rethink our consumption patterns. It is going to be crucial to start producing locally and to start working with that population that is on the rural areas, because they are the ones that are going to feed us, at least in the next few years. We don't really know what's going to happen with the big corporations and the big agro-industry, but we know it's going to have to hit them hard, and that's going to be an opportunity to start working with local producers and with local communities in order to strengthen their production patterns. In the case of water, women face in rural areas, they face the worst, both of the scenarios. The droughts, where many of the regions are having less water. Many of this is a consequence of deforestation in many places, climate change, because temperatures are getting higher because of global warming. So the water evaporates faster, and it may not stay locally, but go to other places. That's why we have, in some places we have droughts, and in some others we have floods. So, and it's something so big that comes out of our hands. So it's something that nobody wants to talk about, because yeah, it's like, we cannot do nothing about it. But that's not true, because the root of this problem is climate change, is global warming, and are the emissions that we are having every time we use too much energy, despite the fact that many places in the world cannot access the amount of energy that we can. So we can see in the pictures, we have the women in the highlands that they have to just move the water in buckets, and in the other side we have a flood in tropical areas, and the main persons that do water fetching around the world are women. And in many cases, they use a lot of amount to go and fetch that water, because they don't have access to water in their houses. So they have like a common well or a common water source that they all have to go and pick it up. And of course, it's not clean water. So that also puts them in risk. But it's important to understand that this is the reality of a lot of women, not only in Bolivia, but all around the world. And water fetching is also puts women in um, a vulnerability situation because they have to walk long distances. Many of them do it alone, and it's a risk, especially for like teenage girls. But in other cases, women have said that these moments when they go fetching with their friends is the moment where they have to go, where they can talk, they get out of the house, and so on. So it is an activity that um, it does take a lot of energy from women, but we have to understand how hard it is for these women to do it, especially when we can go to our bathrooms or to our kitchens and open the faucet and just have clean water. That's not the reality for most women. And the other case scenario is where you have a flood, um, where you're going to lose many of uh, your house and many of your few possessions that you have. And these cases are not attended by most of the governments. And since probably there are going to be small periods of flood, like a few weeks or maybe a month, but still for the women, it's going to be really hard to recover from that because women are linked to domestic activities, and that means that the center of the world is the house. In the other hand, men do their activities outside the house, their productive role. So if something happens to their workplace, they only have to change a workplace, a work activity, but that doesn't. But the core of them is not their main job. So that's one of the things we also have to take into account when we're speaking about climate change and how these are impacting women. The other thing is food security, that women play a huge role uh, in food security along the world, and sometimes we just give it for granted, whether it is that they are producing the food or they are like cooking. Uh, Globally, we have that the activity of feeding the world is women's activity, and it's something that we also take for granted, and it's something that we need to start addressing. And I was saying before, it is important that we right now it's the time to rethink about our food production systems, and we have to enforce that the production be locally, because if we keep on depending on imported goods, then we we're not going to be able to do that. We really don't know how export and import are going to be impacted by COVID-19. But I'm guessing that most of the population are not going to keep on buying Chinese stuff, for example. Not because I'm sure that lots of myths are going to grow around it, if the products are contaminated or not, if what many things that are going to come up. And there's going to be more regulations. We're not going to have the free market as we know it. There's going to be a lot of sanitary standards that production is going to have to face along the world. And small producers, especially women, right now they don't meet the standards because their production is really small, and since it's very locally, they don't come up like so beautiful as the agro industry can do it, but it is necessary to start rethinking this and to start identifying production centers very close to consumer centers. And we have forgotten about that. Our production centers are really very far from our consumption centers. And that's one of the biggest example, I think it's US, where you have in the middle states, the biggest production of food, but you have the biggest population either in East Coast or West Coast. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we have. And along that, food sovereignty is also going to play a bigger role, because the countries are going to have to start putting those restrictions or standards or whatever to see if they're going to feed their people or to export, and what's going to be the cost benefit of that, and so on. So I think we have to take into account, see strategies, and be aware that climate change has a great potential to impact our food security systems. Along biodiversity and ecosystems, well, the extractive industry, which includes oil, which includes coal, which includes gas, which includes agribusiness and minery, are having a huge impact on our environment, on our ecosystems, and on our biodiversity. And many of us are under quarantine worldwide, but there's still a great deal of the population that are still doing these activities, and governments have not done anything to stop activities like mining, for example, or exploration for new fossil fuel sources. So, and that's, while we are all in our houses, there's still people that are deforesting, that are contaminating the rivers, not as much as the whole in the cities, but we have to take into account these activities and how they are damaging biodiversity and ecosystems. And one of the things that is very important to take into account, our relationship with biodiversity. Well, the studies until now have spoken that COVID-19, for example, it's not a lab-made virus, because when you have when you do genetic modifications, there are some markers that you can identify, and they have the genome of the virus, and they couldn't find those markers. So, and they found very similar strains of this virus in pangolins and in bats. So that's why people, well, the scientists believe that it's a mutation that's coming from a virus of these two species that have mutated in order to affect humans. Viruses are the things that mutate faster, and that's why we are on a race against time to find a vaccine. But it has to make us think about our relationship with biodiversity. There is a reason, well, why humanity has only domesticated less than 50 species of animals compared to the hundreds, to the millions of species that there are in the world. So we need those other species to survive, but our relationship with those species have been lost, because we don't know, we don't understand anymore what their role in the ecosystems are, and how the natural systems work. So we have given all that for granted. And I think that a consequence of giving all this, of not taking care of our relationship with biodiversity, with our ecosystems, have led us to this pandemic. But also it's important to know that pandemics have existed all around the history of the world, and that they have a huge impact on human populations. But most of the pandemics had something to do with some kind of animal. So therefore, I really believe that it's important to rethink our relationship with biodiversity and with the ecosystems. And one other thing about this is that most of us are already consuming in a daily basis GMOs, which are genetic modified organisms. They have probably less than 20 years of being with us. So I think it's we need to think about if the natural world is able to send us a virus like the one we're facing, what our genetic modified organisms have the potential to do us in the long term. In the short term, we have not been able to see what the impacts are because they are still not well studied by science, because it takes a lot of time to see the real impacts. But I would advise everyone to rethink about that.
Carmen.
Yes.
Carmen, this is Carol. You're bringing us a wealth of information, and I'm hesitant to step in, but I want us to be attentive to time and make certain that Calixta has a chance to speak a bit about that project. So if you don't have to do it right away, but I just wanted to just bring it up to be sure to turn it over to her for a few minutes.
Okay, no, I'm about to finish. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Well, the other thing is, the other challenge that we have is land tenure, because many places women don't own the land. Basically, they have they work around community territories, especially in rural areas. And it's one of the things that we still need to work around in Bolivia, in Latin America, and many places around the world, because it's still something that we give for granted, who's producing, but then we need to start thinking who owns the land and to have more ownership for women. Well, these are some of the conclusions, but I think I think most of you have the idea by now why we need more policies toward the empowerment of women, and some of these big challenges that we have that are basically along climate change, but also it's necessary to now rethink with this COVID scenario. Thank you. Carol.
It's really, really amazing material. It's really very interesting. And I know there will be questions as well. But Calixta, if we can get some information from her just briefly about the project she's been working on women's empowerment. And Carmen, you were going to communicate that for us. Do you have Calixta on the phone?
I'm calling her.
Okay. Calixta has been putting together women's leadership courses there, and some of you on this call have given to Faithify to help put that together. Classes in various livelihood ways of working, and also adding some entrepreneurial leadership information for the women. Just outside of La Paz, near El Alto, and it's a very solid ongoing educational process.
while Carmen is getting with Calixta, I want to say something.
This is Olga. Hello, Olga. Yeah.
Bolivia.
Yes.
Can I
Hello.
speak just as Carmen is getting in touch with Calixta?
Okay.
Now Calixta is in the rural area because we are living in a quarantine, and she has two children. So it's easy to be there in the countryside because it's easy to have food from the land. Okay, but now I want to first to express our gratitude for you for the support for the first phase of the project to empower women. I want to tell you that the area that was the project there is it's not a rural area. It is a small city close to La Paz. It is the name of this city is Viacha El Alto. Almost the same city, but it is in middle La Paz y Viacha. It is the project, and it was very interesting because we have a framework very big about the how to empower women, but it begins giving them some essential knowledges for make their own economy. And this was one I think that Calixta is already at the communication.
No, Calixta phone is it's off, and she's not in the call.
Ah.
All right. Well, we thought it was going to work, and that's where it is. But Olga is giving some information about the location, and we've been receiving reports and know that the classes have been going on before the shelter in place or lockdown began. On not happening now, as I understand it, but still going forward, with probably 30 women in general on the average in those educational processes, developing leadership, developing empowerment for them.
I have the presentation of Calixta, though.
You do? Okay, all right. All right, go ahead.
So, yeah, because her phone is off and she's not answering the
But you know what she was going to say. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carmen.
A little bit, I can explain a little bit about what she's doing, because under all that complicated scenario that I have shown you, the best way to start dealing with this is to empower women through economic alternatives. And that is what Calixta is doing on a very specific way. So these are some of the results of her project. The training, the second version of the training. She's doing workshops. She's been promoting these workshops through her radio. Basically, the idea is to have three programs, which is one of healthy food, one of sewing, and one of hairdressing. And because this, the knowledge that they're giving these women are going to work for them to have economic alternatives that generate money, because if they have their money, the income, and they have an activity that generates that income, they have better ways to face different challenges. So that's why Calixta is working with the neighbors of it's a a place called Inti Raimi, where it's where she's working with women there and the neighborhood council. And she's giving these trainings on sewing, these trainings on healthy food, and the trainings on hairdressing. And what some other things that she's looking forward for next part of the workshops are they need help on calculating the production cost, for example, in the case of either agricultural production or when they transform it to foods to sell the foods and so on, how do they put a price on the goods or the services that they are doing. They also need to start having a business plan to have a more a real business that can prosper in a long term. Now I think it's important to, well, one of the things she proposes is also the online base market search to see some alternatives online. Other thing that is important and that nobody tells you is that you're going to have to pay taxes. So how do you pay taxes on your goods, on your services, in order to generate income, and how this is done, because we have a very ugly tax system, and many professionals get, or many economic activities get into the tax trap, where they're going to have to pay a lot of fines because they didn't know how to work. That's sort of why it's important to have trainings on taxes, and how the social business projects can be developed and can be evaluated, administration of small business, how to start a business, and financial education. Those are key things that Calixta wants to work in next steps, I think, in order to not only have trained women, but that the women can become entrepreneurs and business owners. So these are some of the data of the trainings that she's been doing around the participants. She had 53 participants register and 45 attending. And it's important, this data, because many women want to participate, but sometimes their obligations with their house or to go work cannot always let them achieve the finish, like the attend or pass the classes or be part of the workshops. So these are some of the pictures of what she's been doing. These are the sewing workshops where they are doing this, we call them polleras. Those are the skirts for the women. So you can see the women, how they are, they have to go with their children, because in most cases they don't have a place where to live at. And I'm sure that Calixta could give more insights around this. But this is how the women are being trained and how they are working around and this is like the final product. This is the pollera, the skirt, the typical skirt that women use here. And this giving women this skill, it does help them to start earning money in the short term. So this is like a small one, and they are practicing in order to start their own businesses. The other program that she has, it's healthy food, where they speak to the women about nutrition, then some nutrition facts, what foods are good, what are not, what's the best way to feed the family, and what products to use, and so on. And here's Olga. Maybe later she can speak a little bit more about how this workshop went. And you can see also that women go with their babies to the workshop. And this is, I think, some bread that they did during the workshop. And those are the persons that are training them and explaining them how to cook and how to think about food. The other workshop that she works is in hairdressing, because hairdressing is also an easy way to generate income for some women, and especially young women are very interested in this. So they call people that can help them and teach them how to do this, and they do this the different hairstyles that you can see that are basically for parties, like birthday party for a 15-year-old, or a wedding, or some other social event. And it does generate them the income. So basically that's the information that I had from Calixta. Maybe Olga can say something else.
No, I want to listen, and maybe you have some questions about our strategy, but I think that this is what we can say about the workshops. And the most important thing is that women are thinking how to generate their incomes, and this is for me the most important thing, because they will be empowerment when they have money, of course. This is it.
And you're working not only on the skills, but also on the business practices and ideas on how to put it together. And that's really, that's
how
really
to grow
important.
their own economy, beginning from simple things that it is, for example, hairdressers. It's very a big demand, you know, and it's not the whole year, and you don't have too much money to invest for make this business, no?
Sophie, do we have questions that have come in through the chat?
Hello.
Hello?
This is Jofi. I'm looking at the chat box, and we do not have any questions in the chat box, but I just unmuted everyone. So, Carol, you can. Whoever has a question can.
We are at an hour, but if people will stay around for a few more minutes, and any questions that you might have, please just speak them.
Yes, this is Dr. Rika from India.
Hello, Dr. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
it's a pleasure to join you all. I have a question with regards to Calixta's presentation. I just want to know how many women have attended the workshops, and how many have benefited from these workshops. How many have set up their own, businesses based on the workshops?
Carmen, you do have those statistics about attendance.
As I was saying, there were the participants that were registered were 53 in total, 23 for hairstyles, 13 for healthy food, and 17 for sewing. And we have seen that 45 persons have attended, and one in healthy food, one more than the register, but the other ones have less participation. And this is an ongoing training. It's like the first part has already taken place, but I think that the project still needs to go to the next phase to start building this in the shape of business. Maybe Sophie can speak a little bit more about this.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, Carmen, I just wrote a question here. This is Julie Steinbach, about the number of women who registered who weren't able to attend. I'm wondering whether or not the men that there have kept them from that because they're threatened by women becoming stronger, or they're subject to emotional violence at home and psychological suppression. So I'm wondering if that's an issue.
Probably in some cases, because well, I really don't know what the
I
reasons
can
are.
answer. We have the
Yes.
in the other in the beginning in the other project, not the. We made 3 things to leadership for women, and in that we were speaking about, and the area in general is a big violence against women, but they don't. We generate with other organization with women to have a special workshop about violence, and in that time they don't express too much about how they were have this violence, but we have the workshop.
Yes, thank you. Other questions?
This is Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. Yes.
Yes, I don't think the question was answered for the doctor about after this is all done, how are people doing? How many businesses have been set up to follow up on?
I'm not sure we have that information, but
This is Jofi. That is too soon. You know, this project has basically so the first phase, as Carmen mentioned, was to give these women a practical skill, whether it's in sewing or hairdressing, or healthy food, developing healthy food habits. Well, and this first phase has practically went on for about a month, and now, of course, it all stopped because of the pandemic. Everything had to be
of course
closed for now. But the second phase is to give them this entrepreneurial training, the training in business skills. And then I think once the women are enabled with these skills, I mean, they once they have these tools, have the knowledge, have the skills, then they can venture out on their own. But this is we're not there yet. So that has to be in the you know, whenever that phase is over, then I think so. I would say the earliest we can have some sort of measure in place on how this training, what kind of effect had this training had on these women, would be 6 months to a year. So that is, at this stage, it's too early to measure that.
other questions?
Yes, this is Marjorie.
Yes, Marjorie.
Can you tell me what the curriculum was of the healthy food? Is it healthy food for their own families, healthy food to sell, healthy food to plant?
Do we know that? Do we have a sense of that?
Yes, this is Sophie, and I do not know. Maybe Olga or Carmen can answer that question.
Yeah, it has 3 parts. First, the women cook for their houses, and we are losing elements of local elements of using because of coming from food from outside. So we are recovering some elements, some elements of the local food, as for example, quinoa, chuño, some, and it's for their own home. One is this. The other is that here you can sell food, and it's a good business, you know. And for example, they can cook for their own neighborhood, and they want to have to sell something different, and that it is healthy at the same time. And the third thing is, hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, we're listening, Olga. Go ahead.
And the third thing is that they are they are getting concept of nutrition. You know, that some very things very basically that what it's a vitamin or things they don't know because they don't have a good education, no scholar rate. So this is we are bordering in these three things.
That's wonderful.
Very good. Thank you.
And this is Jofi. Just one other element I've made a mention that I want to just emphasize is that most of these women are part of the so-called informal economy. You know, most of them are homemakers. So getting these marketable, I mean, these are skills that are marketable. And so what they do with these marketable skills, I think will be very interesting to see. And for now, most of them are economically dependent, of course, on their husbands or on their partners. And making them economically independent is a very, very big step in, I think, empowering them. So that's why these marketable skills that are taught or are during these practical workshops are also complemented with leadership skills, entrepreneurial training, business skills, and so on. So that, I just wanted to mention that element.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yes, one or two more questions. Go ahead, though.
Kathy, being the parent of 2 public school teachers in the state of Texas, I'm wondering what is the average education level of the population?
Primary, just primary school.
Primary school.
They know to read, write, basic primary school.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, usually when the girls start menstruating, they stop going to school because there is a lack of products to control so menstruation has a lot to do with most women in rural areas about achieving their scholar goals. Because once they start menstruating, men know that they are on reproductive age. So it's an issue that has to be discussed, that that we have to talk about worldwide, I think. And we need to work so women have more access to sanitary products on rural areas. That's one of the challenges.
So many challenges. Is there one more question out there? Well, this is Carol again. I really want to thank you, Carmen and Calixta at a distance, and Olga for bringing us this window into Bolivia and the work that's going on there and the things that are happening there and the challenges there. Carmen, I really was fascinated with all that you presented and the way that you related it to our current crisis. You know, the virus is going to make us be more local in our food production, and so many things are going to change, and you gave us a window into that as well. So thank you, and thank you all for spending time with us this morning. I want to let you know and remind you, I think most of you are getting the notice of our Tuesday International Women's Convocation gatherings, which are different in nature. They're more about sharing where each of us are, and an international group of women are getting together on Zoom on Tuesdays and talking about how the the pandemic is treating them in their various parts of the world. And so I invite you all to join us next Tuesday for that. There's also a meeting this afternoon of an organization called NGO CSW NYC. And this is the organization that is the umbrella under which the parallel events at Commission on the Status of Women happen. I think Jofi has sent around an invitation on that. If you haven't seen it, communicate with Jofi. It starts in about an hour and a quarter. It starts at 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, but that should be interesting, and it's quite fine to just zoom into that and lurk. It will probably be a large meeting, but probably informative about where various groups are. So, anything else? Jofi, anything else that I've forgotten?
I think no. I am curious. Someone just joined us, Carmen Bayara, or Marcela Bayara.
Yeah, this is me.
Oh, welcome. Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, I am now in Italy, but you know, I think that I received wrong the day, the how to say the time, because it said 5:30, but I think that you started early, 4:30. In the mail that I received, it was written 5:30, but it seems
yeah, the 5:30 is Eastern European time. Central European time was 4:30.
Yeah, okay, then I was wrong. So that's why I'm coming at the end, because I understood that I was going to be, it was at 5:30, I'm sorry.
There is a recording of this, however.
Yeah, I think. I saw that there was a recording, yes.